I'm Shanna, and this is episode 4 of Spencer Creations. Today, I'm going to show you how to make cute Halloween treat bags for your kiddos for Halloween night. Alright, to get started, you'll need fleece, and these are 9 by 12 sheets, and I will put the supplies over here on the left, but you're going to need orange, black, purple, blue, some white to do the designs that I've come up with here. And I'm going to go ahead and put a link at the bottom for the PDF files that I've created for these specific patterns. Alright, and you'll also need some black ribbon. I used wide, shiny satin ribbon that I had around the house for the handles on these bags, but for the one that I'm going to make this time, I picked up some velvet ribbon. You can either put the velvet to the outside or you can turn it under when you sew it, so that way it makes a soft spot for your child to grab the handle. Okay, so I mentioned the pattern, and all you have to do is click on the link below and it will take you to my Etsy shop where you can purchase the PDF file and then print it out on a regular sheet of paper. And there are 2 ways that you can transfer the pattern. What I like to do, and if you're going to do it multiple times, I would recommend, is tracing it onto these plastic sheets. And I use dollar store cutting mats. You get 2 for like $1, so it makes it real economical, and they're big so that you can use them for multiple projects. To transfer it to the plastic sheets, you just print out the pattern and then you can see through it, and I use a thin Sharpie and just trace around the design. And then you can use a pair of scissors to go ahead and cut the design out, and that way you have a sturdy material to trace onto the fleece. And then you can use it again and again if you want to make multiple treat bags, or every year. These are a few years old. My kids have used them a lot and love them, and they're well worn, so you can use this again to make a new treat bag for them, as long as you have the plastic template. Okay, the other option is you could also trace it onto chipboard. It's a little thinner, a little easier to cut out, and it would also stand up to multiple uses. Okay, the other option for transferring the patterns to the felt is a light box. And see, you can see the design through the felt, and I'm just going to use a Sharpie and trace it onto the top so I can cut around it. On the black, this is a little more difficult, and you'd want to use a silver Sharpie. But if you have a light box that's adjustable, like this one, then you can turn the brightness up and you can still see through. Alright, and I don't know if you can see it there, but we've traced it on, and so now all we have to do is cut around it. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the black one, just to show you. It is a little harder to see, but you can still get the job done. And for this bag, I've decided to do the spider in black, and then I'm going to do the bat in purple. Okay, and then if you decided to do the plastic sheets, I figured I would show you how nice that works to trace. And again, I'm just using a black Sharpie. When you cut, you can cut inside the line, and then you won't see that. And on this pattern, I omitted the second ear on the bat because it'll be under the hat. So rather than cutting it out, I figured it would be okay to just not have it. And there you go, there's the bat pattern. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish tracing around all these and then cut them out, and I'll show you the next step. A couple of tips I thought I would offer. One, when you do the spider legs, since you have to cut 8 of them, I would line them up against the edges and next to each other. That way it saves you on cutting, because you can cut 2 sides at the same time. The other tip, if you're going to use the plastic sheeting for your templates, make sure that when you cut, you keep it near the back of the scissors. If you cut near the front of the scissors, it's going to tend to split the plastic in the direction that you don't want it to go. So if you keep it near the back, then you can guide it without the the cut getting away from you. The last tip I want to add is if you still have Sharpie marks on your pieces, then just flip them over and use the other side. This felt's pretty forgiving, so you can't really tell which is the front and back. And like on the legs, they're pretty small. And since I used a big Sharpie, you can still see the silver. So if you just use the back, you'll never know that you didn't cut perfect inside the line that you traced. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take one of our orange sheets of felt to just go over 3 inches on your ruler. And again, I'm lining up the bottom line and the side line, and that will give me a straight cut. And I'm going to do it again. And it does say this is 12 inches, so these are going to be pretty similar. When I measured it out with a ruler, I found it was slightly off on one end or the other. So we're going to need a full strip for the bottom of the bag, and then for the 2 sides, we're going to need 9 inches. And this is just scrap. And then I'm going to do that again so that we have the other side of the bag. And these are lining up pretty good on the ruler, so that means I did a good job when I cut the first time. We're going to take these strips and we're going to put them aside. The next thing that we want to do is build onto our front and back panel. I'm choosing to put the design on each side, so I'll have one character on the front and one character on the back. If you just want your bag to have decoration on one side, you can go ahead and put both characters or just the one that you like the best. Okay, the next step is to transfer the spiderweb pattern onto the front and back panels of your bag. And the way that I've made this pattern, it will fit right in the corner of the felt sheet. And I would suggest a quilter's chalk pencil with a dark lead. That way you can see your design once you pull the felt off of the light box. And you just trace. I would push kind of hard. It is a little bit difficult to see. And since it's so fuzzy, it might not leave a heavy mark. So I am pushing a little bit heavier than usual. Just make sure you go over each line. That way when you take it to the sewing machine, you can follow the pattern easily. You can also freehand this if you don't have a light box or a chalk pencil. That will work too. And then this chalk pencil will wash out, or a lot of times you can just wipe it off with your hand or with a dry towel when you get done. All right, I'm going to turn the light box off. And I think that I did get all of the design. It does have a little bit of an eraser, so you can mark out some of the lines if you marked in the wrong spot. All right, and as you can see, it transferred pretty well. So now we're good to go with the next step. Now I've set up my sewing machine, and I'm going to just use a satin stitch to go back and forth and put in the lines for the spider web. So if you look over here, most sewing machines are the same, where they have kind of like a quilting stitch that'll just go back and forth. Let's do that one. And that way you can set how wide you want it. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the width down.
And if you look here, it shows you how much it's shrinking the stitch. So it's getting pretty small. And then I'm also going to shrink the length because we want it close together. So that'll make a pretty continuous stitch. So now I'm going to go back and see what that looks like. Again, I'm going to turn the wheel and see. And that stitches. That's a little too thin. So I'm going to up the width of it. Maybe 2.5. I'm just going to start sewing. And I'm just following that line. And I'm just using a white thread. I think it's a silky crew or something like that. All right. So now I'm going to cut it on my sewing machine and then pull it out. And that looks like a pretty good stitch to me. So now I'm going to go through and do the rest of them. And since we're doing so many close together, this is a bit of a slower stitch because I've got my foot all the way down and it's still not moving very fast. So you just have to be patient with it and you'll get a good result at the end. All right, and then I'm going to show you how to do these. So I'm going to place my needle so that it lines up on the side of the one I've already made. And these don't have to be perfect. I'm sure spider webs are not perfectly aligned. And that's what that looks like. Okay, I'm going to finish up both panels and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like when we get done. I've gone ahead and stitched the spider webs on both panels. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is put on the characters. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. I have a design board, which I may make a video showing how to do that, but it's just foam core inside of some batting, and then I trimmed it with fabric around the edge. And what that allows me to do is put my block on there, and then I can put the shapes on, and you can stick pins into the board, and with glue underneath, you can leave it there and it will dry, and then all of your shapes will be together. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble the shapes and show you how that's done. So in this one, just remember that we are going to have the side seam and the bottom seam. So when you're placing your spider, you don't want it too close to the edge because some of that will get sewn into the seam. And before I start gluing, I'm going to place everything down. That way I know that it's just the way that I want it. And then I'll glue it and let it dry. And this is good for new stitchers. If you're not so comfortable on the sewing machine, you can glue all this stuff in place, and that way you know that it won't move when you want to sew it down. If you're more comfortable with sewing, then you can just pin it to the fleece itself, the felt itself, and take it to the sewing machine and just stitch as you go. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to put his little face on and give him some life. And then I'm gonna put the treat bag over here. And since we're just pinning and gluing, it's okay to glue the treat bag down. If you're gonna take it straight to the sewing machine without gluing it, make sure that you leave the top of the treat bag open so that you can tuck some of the ribbon inside of it for a little handle. So I've got everything kind of placed where I want it. Now I'm going to take the glue stick, and I got 3 of these at Dollar Tree in a package. And it's just Elmer's glue, but it has a small applicator, so that way the glue just goes where you want it to. So I'm gonna start by gluing the big section to the little section. And I think I'll go ahead and bring it in closer so you can see where I'm placing the glue. So all I'm gonna do is just put a little bit of glue in between the pieces. Just a little dot is enough. And then I'm gonna place a pin there. And you can put it through the glue, you can put it near the glue, just enough to hold it down until it dries for you. And you don't have to cover every piece of the felt. You just kind of need a couple to tack it down. So like the leg, I'm going to put one in the middle and one on the end. And with the pens, it's the same way. You just need enough to hold them together until that glue dries for you. And this technique is how I applique also. I may do a video on that later too. All right, and I kind of move this stuff around, so I just need to make sure it's in a good spot. And if you want, since some of the stuff is small, you can pin it first and then put the glue underneath it. And that way it won't shift on you. And this way I can put the glue here. For the treat bag, I've gone ahead and cut a strip of ribbon about 5 inches long. And all I'm gonna do is put it in one side and then tuck it over on the other side. And I think it looks better a little closer together. And this just kind of adds 3 dimension, a little bit of interest, and a little bit of color. And I'm going to go ahead and glue that the same way and pin it down. And then when you sew around the treat bag to hold it down, it will also catch that ribbon. And then I thought I'd show you on this one, I went ahead and preemptively pinned, and I haven't glued anything down, and that way the things will stay better. It was shifting a lot on the spider, so I figured this might help, and that it was a good tip to help you guys. Ideally, you should let the glue dry for at least an hour or 2, if not overnight. I usually let my applique sit overnight and then I'll come back to it the next day. But I let this set as long as it took me to glue down the second panel, and then I checked it and it seems like it's sticking fairly well. So I think that it'll, stay attached long enough to get it on the sewing machine and sew it down. So the next step you want to do is gently take the pens out. And some of this does seem to be coming up. And then you're going to take it off the board and we'll take it to the sewing machine and start tacking those down. We're back at the sewing machine and I'm just going to do a straight stitch along the edge of this. And I'm going to choose a middle stitch, and just whatever length the middle stitch is fine. But I want it in the middle of my foot. That way I can guide the line easy. And I'm going to go ahead and bring my needle down just so I can tell how close to the edge that's going to be. And I think that's close enough. And see how this is coming underneath the foot? I don't want it to do that. So I may need to go in just a little bit more. And you just want to go at kind of a slow pace. I'm going to go ahead and set my foot so that it will automatically raise up when I stop. There we go. And that way I can turn it to follow the curve of the felt, of the design. It's getting a little close to the edge there, so I just want to bring it back in. And you can stop and start as many times as you need to make sure that you have it in the right spot. If you have to pull the thread out because it went off the edge, it's not going to be easy to do. And what I do for the pieces that meet up is I'm going to stitch just to the edge of that hat. If it's not stuck down all the way, you can kind of move it back, or the foot will do that a little bit itself, and that way you end up sewing under it just a little bit. And then I'm going to do my lock stitch, cut that off. All right. And there you can see the stitches a little bit. With the felt, it's nice. It sinks into, sorry, my focus is not liking me moving around. It sinks into the felt, so you can't really see the stitches, which is nice because you can also use just about any color you want. I think white would show up a lot. I've used kind of a silvery gray color. And then I was going to show you on the legs, all you want to do is meet up with the edge of the body, and then you're gonna just sew down the center of this leg. If you want, you can go around all the edges, but sewing just the center is enough to tack it down. That's all I did on those other ones, and I've had those for a few years and they're still attached and laying flat. All right, and there's the stitching for that. And then you just go around and do that to all the legs. And we're gonna do the same thing to the bag, just sew around the edge of the bag. And we don't need to tack this down because once we sew the bag, it will catch that ribbon. I thought some of you might be a little confused about what to do with the eye. So I'm just gonna do the same thing that I did with the leg. And that's sew straight down the middle. And you just wanna go slow. And I'm using black here. I used that on the first one and it fuzzed up and you couldn't really see it. If you don't like the look of the black, then you can go ahead and definitely use white thread on there and then it'll disappear. All right, I'm gonna lock it. And you can also come along with your fingers and scratch the felt, and that will also fuzz it up and kind of make that line disappear. Sorry there about the focus. See, now you can still see it, but it's a little less pronounced. All right, I'm gonna finish this one up and the next panel, and then I'll show you what it looks like at the end, and we'll go ahead and assemble the bag. The next thing I'm gonna do is cut the strips for the straps of the bag. And you need 18 inches of whatever ribbon you've chosen. And you need to cut 2 of those. And then we're gonna need a strip that is 28 inches long. So I'm gonna do 18 on my board and then another 10. And this piece is gonna go around the top of the bag. It'll be this border right here. Just kind of gives it a more finished edge. The ribbon I'm using came from Joann's. It's velvet on one side and kind of smooth on the other. It's 7/8 of an inch wide, and you get 9 foot on the roll. And it was half off, so I think that's like, what, $3? And it'll do all this bag, and you still have some left over for another project. Okay, now we're gonna move on to assembling the bag. So I did have to try this a couple of times, and the easiest way that I found is to sew the strips end to end. That way you'll have the seam already, and then we can just build around the edge of the bag and sew those seams. I think that'll be the easiest way to get the bag together since it's a rectangle. All right, so I'm just gonna pin the ends together. And I'm just double checking for my marks to make sure they're on the inside. I don't want those to show later. All right, and then I'm gonna pin the other one. All right, so I've got this together. I'm gonna take them to the sewing machine and stitch them, and then I will show you how we're gonna attach them to the bag. Okay, I don't know how many of you guys noticed, but I sewed the long strip on the end and the 2 short strips together. So when you go to sew yours, make sure that the long strip's in the middle, because that's gonna be the bottom. It's getting late here, so I'm not thinking clearly. All right, so next we're gonna take the short strip and one side of the bag, and we're going to pin them together. And then we're going to skip over to the other side of the bag, and we're going to take the other short piece and pin those together. Make sure right sides are facing and that your seam is towards you. Swing this around. And then I'm just going to do a straight stitch down those 2 sides. And I like to put the needle on the left side and then just line up the edge of the felt with my foot. That gives me a good seam allowance. to make sure to stop when you get to the edge of the side. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I did make sure to reinforce those seams by sewing along there a couple times because the bottom is going to take all the weight of the candy. Then you just line up these edges on the ends and sew down that side. And your seam allowance should be big enough that it catches the side along with the bottom. All right, and there's the first half of your bag. I'm just gonna go ahead and do the same thing with the other side, and then I'll show you what we're gonna do after that. After you finish sewing the sides and the bottom together, you wanna flip the bag the right way out and make sure that all your corners caught. And if not, then, turn it back and make a little bit bigger margin, like seam allowance, when you sew. So the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna measure about 3 inches in from the side seams, and we're going to make a mark with our chalk pencil or just a regular pencil. It'll be covered up, so you just want kind of a guideline, and this mark is going to be the center of where we're going to attach our handles. And you can mark both sides or just one, because once you have the first handle on, then you can just flip it over and you'll see where the guide is for your second handle. And then what you want to do is put this on the inside of the bag and kind of line up that mark you made with the middle of the ribbon. And you want, let's see, how much is that? 1.5 inches or so. Inside the bag, just enough so that you can sew over it a few times and that it's going to hold pretty well. Okay, so I have that centered on my line, and I'm going to go ahead and put a pin through both of them so that it'll hold that in place. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the handle. And make sure that you don't twist the ribbon. And then let's see. That's about 1.5 inches on that side. And then I'm going to go ahead and pin that one. And so that I can take both of them to the sewing machine and sew at the same time, I'm going to flip it and do it on the other side as well. And now you have the guide for the first handles to tell you where to put this one. Same thing, and this will even tell you how far down to put the ribbon, because you can just line that up and then get your pen and mark that. And the same thing with the other side. And just make sure that if you do the velvet, that the velvet is pointing towards the top of the bag when you go to pin it. That way you won't get it twisted. We're going to go ahead and sew this on, and then that way when we put our trim around the top of the bag, it will hide those marks. I'm going to go ahead, swing this around. and attach those handles. And again, just a straight stitch. And I would go over it, 3 times, 4 times, because that's going to be holding all the weight of the candy that your kiddo gets that night. And a broken handle and candy all over the ground is not what you want. And you can go a little on either side of the handle. That way you make sure that you get it really good. And I'm just going to measure how wide my strip is. That way I know kind of where to place it. So it looks like if I line up the edge of my foot with the edge of the top of the bag, that puts it kind of in the middle of where that ribbon will sit. And I really want this to hold, so I'm going to backtrack a few times and then go across and backtrack. And if you keep it straight enough, you can backtrack. Although since the ribbon will be over the top of it, it doesn't matter if that line's right on top of the other. You just want to, sew it down really good. So I'm just going to do that a few times. All right, I think that's pretty good. I'm going to move on to the next one. The last part to assembling the bag is the trim. So I would pick kind of a seam or, the side of the bag, somewhere you're not going to really notice, to start sewing. And you just want to make sure to tuck under the end when you come back around. And I think that you could leave it flat when you start, because if you do the velvet, it doesn't really fray, and you're going to want it kind of flat. So if you double up both ends, then I think it would make it kind of fat on that side. So if you just pin, and you want it as close to the top as you can get it. And you're just going to work your way around the bag. And then all you're going to do with this is just a straight stitch along the top. And the ones that I did stayed down pretty well, just with that one stitch. If you like the look of 2 stitches to kind of finish it off, you could do the top and along the bottom, and that way it would hold for sure. So I'm going to finish pinning this and sew it down, and then I'll show you what the finished bag looks like. This is the final product. I went ahead and sewed the edge where the 2 ribbons overlapped, just because this being loose, I was a little worried about the look of it. But so there's the front and the back. And on my older kids, I went ahead and personalized it with their names, and it's just puff paint. If the felt would hold up, I think you could use like vinyl, iron-on vinyl, and a iron, or I use a t-shirt press, and put the name on with that, or you can just leave the bag the way it is. It's cute either way. I had a lot of fun showing you how to do this. I hope that you guys have just as much fun making yours. Thanks for watching. If you like this channel, please subscribe.